Okay. And so the broad question that I was asking with this study was, what is both peculiar and authentic in Peruvian Christianity? In other studies and travels that I've done, I've seen in popular art, popular culture, different expressions that looked very Peruvian, especially in dress and in custom and in action. And so I wanted to consider how syncretism historically and contemporarily influences worship and influences culture and influences understanding. But in my study of that, I came across Dr. Eliseo Perez Alvarez, who had been at the Lutheran Institute here and is now in Chicago as part of an extension with Chicago University. And when I went to him, and this guy's a great scholar. He was born in Mexico, and he's worked in Puerto Rico, he's worked in Chicago, he's worked here, and he's worked in several other countries. And what he said is, don't use the word syncretism, don't use the word negotiation, enculturation. I hate those words. And I said, oh my God, have I offended you? And this guy's got a great sense of humor, and most of my dialogue with him was all bilingual. And he likes to do wordplay and word games, and so he would kind of mess with me, and I wouldn't catch on to the fact that he was joking with me, and then I realized that he was making fun of me or making a joke with me, and we'd laugh together about it. But he said, think about the word negotiation, because syncretism and enculturation, which I'll get into, imply a power differential or a power dynamic that is all top-down. It's all from the institution where the individual has no agency and is subject to the wishes and desires of the greater institution, such as Christianity in this case. So we're going to look at the Conquista and the way that syncretism and enculturation came into play and how we talk about those anthropological terms. And then in the end of this presentation, I'm going to reimagine how that was actually a negotiation rather than a top-down kind of mandate by the church. So our first slide, this is a picture that's hanging on a painting that's hanging on the wall in the Cusco Cathedral. You might know that Cusco was the Inca stronghold in Peru when the conquistadors arrived. Francisco Pizarro obviously came in and just wiped out this beautiful culture that already existed. But one of the things that really assisted in the conversion of peoples towards Christianity was the art, because there was great artists in the Inca culture already. And this comes from the Cusco school. And so when the Europeans show up, they've got all these new mediums. They've got new ways of glazing ceramics. They've got new ways of painting. They've got all these new media for art. And so the Cusco school was very rich in what they produced. Obviously, this is a reprint, not a reprint, but this is a reimagining of the Last Supper. What's interesting here, and this is where we'll get into talking about syncretism or enculturation, is right here in the middle platter, in the middle of the table, which you can't see very well, but that meat there is cuy, which is a traditional meat in Peru. It's basically our guinea pig. What's interesting about the cuy, though, here, and the significance of it, is that cuy wasn't just a staple of food. It was actually a ritual food. It was used for offering. It was used for very special occasions. So its presence on the table, in one sense, we can think about it as, okay, well here, Marco Zapata is paying homage to Christianity and showing the sacrificial offering of tying together this Incan custom with the sacrificial lamb of Christianity right behind him. Also on the table, what you can't see are we have potatoes, different types of corn, and peppers, which are all New World foods. Not all, but mostly New World foods. And so this is a way that people have often thought about enculturation as well. So now we're going to take a Christian trope, like the Last Supper, and we're going to tie some elements into it that start to make it local in its flavor. No pun intended with the food thing there. And that leads us to today. This is a depiction of the Last Supper using ceramics. Now this is in the Cusco style of ceramics, of ceramic decoration. And so we've gone from taking, our typical kind of Western European images of the disciples in their robes with Christ in his halo. I'm going to come back to this. Y'all don't let me forget. To very Andean-looking dress with the hats, A lot of them you'll see, when you can see them at the table, they have their sandals on. And so this is our modern thing. And this is kind of turned into a trinket. We'll see these in gift shops. We'll see them on people's tables. But it's a way that we can see how Christianity has been fully enculturated and has now become an identifier. It's a signifier for this is our identity. And it's not only that, it also kind of speaks to righteousness. It says, basically, that this could have happened here. These are our people. And as a liturgical person, our Anglican understanding of liturgy is that we're always participating in what God is doing. And so when we do the Eucharist, God's time, or God's eternity breaks into our temporal time, and that's something we participate in, so that when we take the Eucharist, we're actually participating in the Last Supper with Christ. And so when we see this, that's kind of another way of thinking about that, is that this happens in this place. This happens in this time. The next piece of art we have from history, this is called the Virgin of the Mountain. And the artist of this is unknown. Some people speculate that the folks down here on this part of the painting are the patrons who actually had commissioned the work. This is a big time example of what we would call syncretism. This mountain, what you can't see is this is the Virgin Mary. And what they've done is they've taken this holy mountain, Cerro Potosí, which is actually in Bolivia, but it's in the southern Andes, or at least southern for Peru. This is supposed to be the richest mountain in the region. All of the silver that made this region rich came from this mountain in this range. But they've tied the Virgin Mary in with this mountain. And the reason they have done that is because long before Inca, this is the great thing. So Pizarro and the conquistadors come, they see Incan religion, and they say, okay, well here's this heathen religion, much like Patrick does when he goes to Ireland. And he finds all their holy places, their customs and traditions, and he gloms Christianity onto it. And one way of approaching syncretism is to just void these symbols of all their significance and refill that with Christian significance. Or you can kind of mesh the two together. When Pizarro and the conquistadors show up, they find the Inca religion, and they learn that syncretism is nothing new. The Incas, in fact, were Johnny-come-latelys, as you probably know. They hadn't been around that long. And all in that time, in order for them to conquest and spread their own empire, they had to adopt local deities. And when the people acted up, they would drag that idol out into public and whip it until the people got into shape, and then they'd put the idol back in its place of honor in their own temples. One of those deities, or one of those phenomena, is Pachamama. And Pachamama is basically like Mother Earth, Earth Mother. And the tradition goes way back, long before the Incas, of the indigenous peoples getting offerings to Pachamama. Cuy was one of those offerings. And every year in August, which is the height of winter in this part of the world, was the big festivals for Pachamamas, which now, incidentally, is the time of big festivals for patrons of cities and towns. And so what the artist has done here is he's tied the Virgin Mary, the Holy Mother, with the Earth Mother. What's interesting, though, and we'll get into this with negotiation later, is that Pachamama was not a virgin, was nowhere near a virgin, was never understood that way. In fact, the first Bartolo Cobo, who was one of the first chroniclers of Incan worship and religion, talked about the lasciviousness of Pachamama worship and how women were the head worshipers who led the rituals in their lasciviousness, and how this would not stand. And so it's interesting to think about how this one person who's chronicling this, who was a religious person, a member of the clergy, would not stand for the syncretism of Pachamama and Virgin Mary, but here we have it happening. That brings us to today. And you'll find these nativities all over the place. It's one of my favorite things that I came back with from Peru. I brought nativity sets to everybody. And again, we have the same kind of righteousness aspect of the birth of God happens here as it happens in Jerusalem. And the reason I chose this nativity, and they vary widely, but here you can kind of see the Andean dress, the sandals. A lot of them will have alpacas and llamas instead of donkeys and lambs. But what really struck me, and when I first walked up to this, I got tears in my eyes. The Virgin Mary is laying down and she's nursing the Christ child. And you actually see her breast and her nipple. He's not latched on it. So it's not this, I can't imagine seeing the Virgin Mary in Renaissance art depicted this way. It's very earthy, it's very tender, and it is indeed holy and righteous. But here again, we kind of have this idea of the Pachamama, this earth mother who suckles the world and creation. And there's no propriety in that. There is, but it's not our European propriety. So we have these offerings, and we have this idea of how this cultural understanding is beginning to be reimagined in Christianity in the past, and how that's evolved to today. And this is me. And this is Father Esteban Zapata Larrea. And we are near the city of Chiclayo, which is in the northern coastal part of the country. And we're preparing to do Eucharist at a church out in the countryside. And the reason I have these pictures up is these bottles down in front. And so as we're setting up for worship, people came and they brought these Coke bottles filled with water, and they uncapped them and set them in front of the altar. As you can see, more people showed up because we have more bottles as the morning progresses. And I didn't notice what was happening at first. And so we go on with worship, and afterwards, then I noticed people started coming up and putting the caps on the bottles and taking them off. And I said, what is going on here? And so when I asked Esteban, I said, what is the deal with these bottles? What is this? He said, oh yes, this always happens this time of year. Well, what is it? He said, well, people bring their water, and they're going to place it in front of the altar. Granted, this is August. And they're going to place it in front of the altar, and they're going to take that water home after the service, and they're going to put it on their crops. They're going to put it on ailments. They're going to give it to the old. They might drink it. They might bless their house with it. And I said, well, have you blessed the water? Is this holy water now? And he said, no, we don't really do that. and I said, well, how did this practice come about? And he said, I don't know, it's always been. The reason this is significant to me, the reason why I think this is a great example of negotiation, which I'm going to get into, is that our Christian understanding about holy water is all over the place. It's ambiguous. If you were to ask me as an ordained person, do I think that holy water has magical properties? The word magic is going to repel me. I'm going to say, no, this is not magic. But at the same time, I don't discount mystery in God's ability to act and not waste anything. And we treat it as such. If you ask any other person in the clergy, if you ask them about holy water, they're going to give you a similar answer. But we treat it differently. We don't just pour it down the drain. We don't just mix it with the sewage that goes out into the water. In most churches of Anglican and Catholic and Orthodox slant, you'll have in the church a special sink that pours directly into the church. It's called a lavabo. And it pours directly into the ground of the church so that any of the elements that have been blessed, whether it be bread or wine, go to a holy place. And they don't mix with profane things. And so we've got these dual images. But how this... So this is obviously a practice of offering to the land. It's a practice of what some might say is pagan mysticism or pagan magic, which I don't like because it's not. It's very Christian. They bring it up for the most sacred thing that we do. And then they take it home and they bless their earth with it. But it's also a practice that goes deep to the roots of who they are. It goes deep to the roots of their ancestors, of giving an offering at this time of year to the land, so that not just for their own flourishing, not just for their own benefit, but because it is meet and right so to do. So I want to go back. So now we have to question this idea of syncretism, especially when I think about Esteban's attitude towards this custom in this church, because I didn't see it in every Peruvian Anglican church to which I went. I saw it specifically in this one rural farming community, and so, but his attitude about it was just, no, this is just what they do, and it's perfectly fine. The church here is not trying to say, well, either I have to bless this water on behalf of God and the church, or you don't do this. This is something that's very natural to the people. It's something that he understands, though it might not be the church's theology or practice, it's something that he allows. It's a negotiation. So now we come back to Marcos Zapata. And when things that I have read about this painting, and specifically the syncretism and enculturation that's present in it, they all talk about how the Cusco school taught these things so that Christianity would be more palatable to the indigenous people. What came later, and what I began to find, was this man right here is depicted as Judas. He's holding a sack of silver. And he's the darkest one on the table. And he's actually, as many say, now this can't be proved, but many say that he very strongly resembles Francisco Pizarro, who was a conquistador of Cusco, who conquered Cusco and wiped out all their holy shrines, all their Psique system, and filled it with Christian significance. And now here in the midst of all of that happening, Marcos Zapata paints Judas as Francisco Pizarro. The people who were being conquered, the people who were being syncretized and enculturated, had very much agency. They might not have been able to retake Cusco. They might not have been able to retake their country. They might not have been able to take over their holy mountains and their holy sites. But they can give some narrative of how they feel. And they can give some relevance to their traditions and their customs. And those things are still alive today. So in my study, I kind of had a dual approach. Because of my history and my study in academia, I approach things as an anthropologist. But I'm also a member of the clergy, so I approach things also as a theologian. And so I come to several conclusions with all of this. And as an anthropologist, I want to say that and we see this in history, in academia as well, is that now we're not always looking at how the winner gets to write history, but we're looking at the narrative history, and we're looking at the small stories and the experience of individual peoples to paint a broader picture of the landscape at the time. And so that's important. And when we start to do that, we can really begin to see what's actually happening, what's actually taking place, and how those things have influenced today. So how today somebody can come and just put their Coca-Cola bottle full of water in front of an altar and take it home and pour it out on their crops. And as a theologian, I want to approach it and not worry about so much which words we use, as far as if it's syncretism and it's this power differential, or if it's this top-down thing, or if it's this bottom-up thing, or if it's this negotiation thing. Those are all important in our approach to how we study things. But as a theologian, I am encouraged and enthused and inspired by people who can find truth and authenticity in everything that they do, and in the midst of their own context and their own time, and in the midst of their of circumstances that they may or may not like. God breaks forth, and God is honored, and that's a good thing. So that's the end of what I have to say as far as this. Are there any questions? Yeah.
When was that Marcos Zapata
1753, 1750s, mid-18th century.
Did you, yeah, I have just a follow-up. Did you see the exhibit that was at the Benson, 3 or 4 years ago on, was it Saints and Angels? It was basically Latin American art from exactly that period.
No.
Yeah, the catalog may still be around. It was an amazing exhibit, and it had some of the Mary in the Mountain images. It had this wonderful one of the flight from Egypt where they're going off and they have the donkey has picklebacks over the. Yeah, I mean, there are ones of the Noah with armadillos and llamas. I mean, it's just there were wonderful images. But you said something that I thought was really interesting to me about the way that it works sort of religiously and theologically for you. That it makes it present at everywhere. It's not just in Jerusalem. It's not, so it contextualizes it for everybody. Right. And that was just a really helpful comment to me. So I wanted to think a little bit. I mean, I've got lots to say about syncretism, and I don't really want to go to it at the moment. About sort of your last point about the kind of finding this sort of space for this kind of negotiation and authenticity. Because one of the problems, and you see this with, say, medieval religions all the time, is that people don't always make that space, right? Or they have to somehow bound it eventually. So when does that space stop being an authentic expression of Christianity for you and start being something else?
Yeah.
So if it is, I mean, take Haiti, for example. If it's Haitian voodoo, is it still, that probably has gone the other way. That probably is no longer, even though it starts within a Christian setting, that probably has moved outside that.
Or Santeria,
or Santeria. That's right. So where so where do we find those lines between what allows this kind of rich contextualization that you're really interested in, and when does it stop being Christianity?
Well, as far as when it stops being Christianity per se, at least as an Anglican, we have the Chicago Lambeth Quadrilateral.
So there you go.
Anglican thing to say. And that's basically a group of theologians within the Anglican and some other ecumenical churches that got together and said, here are the 4 things that make us who we are. Okay. And so the creeds are one of those things, our practices in honor of scripture, tradition, and reason. But that being said, I'm glad my bishops aren't here.
It strikes me as an outsider that, in fact, the Anglican Church is very flexible about this, whatever your bishops may say.
My home church in Corpus Christi, we built a labyrinth, and this is indoor. And right next to the labyrinth, we have what we call the Oratory of the Good Shepherd. And you go into the oratory, and it's actually Native American kiva, which is kind of a dugout hole in the ground with an altar in the middle. And when you turn around and you look at the doors that you just walked through, you see the symbols of most of the major faiths and some smaller ones. So you see Islam represented there, you see Judaism, you see Christianity, you see Native American religions represented there, you see Buddhism represented there, you see the Tao Te Ching, or you see the Tao represented there, Taoism, you see Confucianism, and Shinto. And so we have these sacred symbols as recognizing that we all are searching and that we all are participating in something much larger than ourselves, and we have our ways of interpreting what it is that we're involved in together, and that we have different expressions of that, and we have a way to honor that and a way to be authentic. And so, in my 20s, when I was real into Taoism, for instance, that was great. There's a lot of wisdom there, but it's just not me. It's just not authentic to who I am or who I was or who I'm going to be. And so it doesn't make it false. It's just not mine. And so there are other things that are theirs. And so when these worlds collide, when we have the confluence, which I think are rich places, borderlands, rich places, because you have the meeting of 2 cultures and maybe even 3, and ways of living and ways of being, and that's where Jesus was. I mean, Jesus was in a borderland. He was in a crossroads where there was confluence of ideas and traditions and thoughts, and richness comes out of that. And we know that by the fruits. And when it's love and compassionate and beautiful, whatever the hell we want to call it, it's good.
I mean, as again, my sort of as a medievalist, I'm very interested in certain issues of sort of boundaries in the book, and you know, where tolerance, intolerance, a whole set of questions like that. And so, you know, I mean, years ago I was in France, and I wish I'd taken a picture of this, but I was driving along this road where a lot of the Romanesque churches are, and there was this one gorgeous 12th century small little parish church, and it had a lovely little shrine in it. And there, sitting by the shrine, was this little sign that said something like, it was in French, the superstitious old women who keep leaving offerings of birds here, would they please stop? You know? And it was clearly written by the priest, and he was annoyed by the little women in the town who were leaving this stuff here. And I wish I'd taken a picture of it, but you know.
It's like St. Weinford.
Yeah, well, sure, but you know, that priest did not have the room for the water bottles, in a sense, but the folks in Chile, in Peru did. You know, that's
a post-Reformation thing, right? I mean, pre-Reformation syncretism is that's our mode. Before the Reformation, that's just how we did it. Yeah. And then post-Reformation, we have to know where the boundaries are, and we have to say that this is what is the church.
There were still boundaries. I mean, there was all, you know, an Inquisition.
Right. Sure.
So, in any case, I don't want to apply to other questions. So,
Okay.
well, thank you very much.
Thank you.